while while people are filing in, I want to do just a real quick like, hey, my name is X. I work in here, and I'm looking to get Y out of today's session, or I'm curious about this thing. Um, I'm Will. I'm a software engineer at the University of Chicago, and today I'm curious to see how easy or difficult it is for people to share their models on Garden. Pass to Benji.
Oh, hi. So Ben Galuski, University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana, and I've been in ESIP for probably the past 7 years. All the stuff keeps seeping in, and yeah, I'm really curious to see about the ability to share models. It seems like such a valuable thing to be able to do.
And I'm Ben Blazik, also on the team working with Ben Galuski and Will and Owen here on Garden. So we're really excited to see what the use cases are in the earth science community, learn about your needs and how we can help you with model sharing.
Yeah, Owen, you want to say hi? Then we'll go to the attendees. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Owen. I'm a research software engineer. I work with Will and Ben on Garden. Great to meet everyone.
And if folks are like kind of uncomfortable unmuting, that's totally okay. But if anyone would love to kind of just get a sense for, oh, what are people looking to get out of this session? Yeah, Giles, you
Can go
volunteered.
next. Hi everyone, my name is Jael. I'm a PhD student at UT Austin, and I'm also ISIP community fellow for the disaster cluster. I'm also very interested in like sharing like MM models like effectively, especially in geoscience field. Thanks.
Hello. Hi, I'm Stephen Hellard. I'm from the UK Met Office. So I work in our data science research and development team, kind of helping people across our organization kind of adopt and use AI, ML, etc. So I'm just interested to see kind of where things are in this community in terms of like sharing models, looking to adopt common practices within our organization. So keen to see what's happening elsewhere.
So thank you. Anyone else brave and interested in sharing kind of what their angle is on model sharing?
I guess I can go. Hi, everyone. My name is Maricela. I work for the Stanford University Libraries. And I guess I'm curious how I just heard of Garden through this conference. So I was maybe wondering how it's different from Hugging Face for sharing models.
Excellent line of questioning that we will get to. Thank you.
I think there's a whole slide on that. So perfect.
Okay. Last call. Anyone else? It's okay if not. Yeah.
So go ahead and set the stage for why this. So this session, the idea for this came up during a Cyber 2A as part of the Permafrost Discovery Gateway project. We had a workshop in Santa Barbara over the summer, and it was all about machine learning and artificial intelligence and models. And it was so interesting. Everyone there had been like, developing for their own work fascinating models. There was one that I was really inspired by that can track individual bits of floating ice in the ocean. And when I talked about sharing, everyone just got a puzzled look on their face. And it seems so useful for like, okay, you've dedicated your research to developing this model. There are undoubtedly other people that could use that as a starting point for their research, but it's just so darn hard. So I talked to my colleagues in the Garden teams, like, what if we just made it easy for people to just come bring your models and let's have an upload-a-thon, and people could get kind of a critical mass going and then go in and talk to your friends. So we're finally here. So thank you, Will, for organizing this, and let's see where we go. This is going to be a fun session.
Sweet. Yeah, no. Thanks so much, Ben. And thanks everyone for coming and hearing about this. I'll start sharing my screen, get kicked off with some slides. Ta-ta. So are you seeing a Google Chrome window with various tabs in it? I believe so. Yeah.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So
Still works.
excellent. So here we are at ESIP. Thanks for coming. The high level problem we are trying to solve with Garden, lots of research teams are doing really interesting model development. And then at this stage in a presentation, we often have like a dumpster or a dumpster fire thing for where the models kind of end up. They go into a bit of a black hole, but this is a very environmentally conscious group. So I think we at least recycle or compost our models that, don't really get used. But so we've talked, like I heard a little bit about Hugging Face. We're going to talk about some other things out there that are good practices for sharing models. But it's like at best, generally, it's like there's a nice Hugging Face repo or GitHub repo with some instructions that maybe got kind of stale. But what we would like to make it easier to do is for sort of domain specific machine learning models in the sciences, can we make it easy for those to be accessible and critically executable on demand so that you don't have to spend a lot of time getting an env working, getting the CUDA install working for this particular GPU, this particular model? How can we make it easy to encapsulate that and share it out? And so here, for an example, is a model that Ben Galuski got running, inspired by that previous session. I believe this is not ice, but permafrost in this example for the permafrost heads out there. We are seeing an independent environment where we kind of just need to install the Garden AI SDK. There's some other installs here to do post-processing after, but don't worry about that right now. Grab a Garden client, log in, refer to a Garden by its DOI. This Garden has different functions on it that perform these encapsulated model runs, have a valid input for this function, execute it, get some data back. In this case, you did need to have a bit of context of like how to process this and turn this back into an image, but here it is. Ben has done the post-processing, and we have some useful information about permafrost that I don't fully grok. And Ben may not either, and that's fine. That's why we are the generalist programmers coming to learn from you guys about what's useful in earth science and get some of this seeded and get some of this rolling. But so that is the big vision here. How can we make it easy to have these encapsulated models easily runnable on demand? So our agenda today, we're going to do a quick why Garden spiel, what's like kind of specific about the angle we're taking here, walk through some simple examples together so that we kind of understand the concept and understand how to do it. Then we are going to kind of break out and work on uploading models ourselves. Could be something that you or someone on your team has developed, but also totally valid. And in some cases, like an even more useful exercise is finding out how to get some other model out there from some other team working in this executable state. Please do interrupt me and ask questions as I go. It may be the case that I'll be like, sorry, we'll get to that later. I'm going to be a little aggressive on time to try and work through this content quickly so that we have a lot of time at the end to go into like individualized breakout sessions and debug with people sort of one-on-one. So for that reason, I might be like, okay, sorry, we'll get to that later. And one request in advance for you all is inside the doc here. Oh, that's nice. Thank you. There is a bit of kind of like prep work, account creation that is going to be useful to happen. So we are in this group called Globus at the University of Chicago, supercomputing infrastructure, et cetera, and we use a lot of Globus infrastructure. If you could make a Globus account, usually you just log in with your institutional ID. It's pretty straightforward. Log into the gardens.ai, and add here the email address that is linked to your Globus account, and this will like show up in the Garden UI. We then will add you to an allow list of people who can do this model publishing. And if you do this async while I'm going through the material, we'll be ready to roll when we're at execution time. So thank you. So, and then some things that like we are hoping to get out of this. This is a little ambitious on our end. This is the first time we've done this. We're just getting this kind of like paradigm rolled out, and we're really interested to see how it works. Is it too hard? Is it actually pretty reasonable? And also, we want to learn about earth science in particular. What are the models that spring to mind that would be useful to have running in this way on demand? Things like that. What are the problems around model sharing specific to your community? So prereqs here, we do assume you have a recent enough Python on your machine. We've asked you to make this Globus account, and then you don't have to do this right away. But under the hood, Garden is using Modal, a sort of like cloud GPU on-demand service to have this on-demand compute. If you are someone who is just running models that live on Garden, you don't need to think about Modal. But if you are a publisher, which I'm hoping to convert some of you here today to, you will need a Modal account. This is also free. You don't need a credit card. They give you a lot of free credits, just for joining. And then ultimately, if you get your models to Garden, we are the ones who are footing the bill. This is never going back to like your Modal account, your Modal credentials. And some assumptions here for those who did bring their own models. Here's kind of like what we can accommodate right now. We do assume that your model is open and trained. We are kind of just for the inference step of things. And further, we assume that like the code is published somewhere and the serialized model weights are somewhere publicly available, somewhere like Hugging Face, somewhere like GitHub, somewhere like Figshare. We also assume for now that your model isn't really big, on the order of like 10 gigabytes we can handle. Above 50, yeah, maybe give it a shot. I'll be curious to see what happens. We're gonna like keep working on this stuff, but that's sort of where we are in like the scope of this quick workshop. All right. And so now why Garden in particular? What are we trying to do here? With Garden, we are trying to make a sort of one-stop entryway to do FAIR, which is, help me out on this team, findable, accessible, interpretable, reproducible.
Interoperable. You got it almost.
Interoperable.
Yep.
Darn, I was so close. We love FAIR. And we have other kind of like products in our suite that are more focused on large data sets in the sciences. Garden is what we are trying to do to make model publishing and execution easier for the scientific community. The pitch is Gardens are these collections of related models. So for example, we work a lot with materials people, maybe different models that do different materials property prediction tasks all together, kind of lumped into one Garden, perhaps linked to data sets also stored somewhere public on, these sort of materials data that went into training those models in the first place so that you can reproduce the full cycle. We will be looking at lots more examples of this, but the pitch is if you got your model onto Garden, then the user just needs to install the Garden package, can take their inputs, run it behind the scenes. This could be happening on different kinds of GPUs, lots of different requirements, things baked into the container. But the user isn't doing that setup, input, output via Python. Here's just kind of one example of like bringing all of this together in a particular domain. Again, in materials world, we have some like all of a complete material screening pipeline inside of Garden and our data repositories where we have these different Garden model functions running different parts of a pipeline. And now you can have a publication where, sort of individual bits of your you can have citable, runnable functions marked with a DOI where you can share out and have all the constituent parts of your scientific workflow published, shared, citable. And then to the question of like, why not just Hugging Face? Hugging Face is great. I love Hugging Face and I use it regularly. Hugging Face is super, super good for sharing model weights. And I personally generally publish my model weights on Hugging Face and then import them for execution with Garden. Hugging Face does also have Hugging Face spaces, which is, kind of closer. Now we are doing some inference, but they tend to be more focused on like LLM, specifically the transformers and diffusers libraries, making that really easy. And for ranty reasons I won't go into right now, and we'll kind of see as we go along with this together, Garden and modal that it's building on top of are, I think, better suited for this use case of having these like mix and matchable functions in different environments that you can then combine into one scientific workflow. And so the Hugging Face question we get a lot. A question I think we should actually get a little more is, how is this better than Colab? I think Colab is actually like the behavior of scientists that we are trying to replace. Like I see when people publish a paper, they will often have a Colab notebook with the code there, so you can click through the cells, execute the model. And that's like the sort of niche that we are hoping to get into. Again, we're not like a Colab replacement, but for the specific behavior of like, I just want my model out there, runnable, and able to be injected inside of some more Python code. This is sort of like where I actually see researchers going and sort of like where I think we can slide into. All right. And now I want to take a second to branch out and kind of ask you guys, with this in mind, does anything like jump to your mind of like, oh man, I would love it if there were a garden of XYZ kind of model. And I also have a section for like freeform stuff. Sorry, this is kind of split across here, but if async, you're like, oh, here's something I would be interested in getting inside of Garden. Please throw this in the document here so that we can maybe try it independently, do it later in the session. But throwing it open to the crowd, does anything come to mind? If not, that's okay. All right, we'll just move on and get through some examples together. Also, actually, Benji, how would you reframe that question in any way that might be more generative for people, if I can put you on the spot?
Sure, feel free to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess one question is, are there like foundational models that people have seen that we should be making more use of? Or research, people that are doing research that are, so like tracking ice, that's at our workshop, everyone said, oh yeah, I could definitely use that. And many people were trying to train their own models to do that. And so I guess another way of thinking about it is in different communities, are there common models that kind of everyone needs kind of for their foundation to be able to build the research on? So I know ESIP is an opinionated group. Come on.
Okay. Well, thanks for kind of like putting that in a tighter fashion. But maybe, folks will have ideas later. We can come back to this. Right now I'll go and step through how does one use Garden to share a model? Like, let's walk through that, go step by step. So I noticed inside of the doc that people did share their Globus accounts, I think in the background. Owen got them added. You should have gotten an email where you can like say, great, I accept. Now there's a link to the garden model upload form in the slides and on the doc. Can people access it? Can people get to this page? Is anyone here blocked on, oh, I'm seeing go talk to Will or Owen message on this page instead? Okay. I am hearing not. That's exciting. We'll keep moving. Thank you. So we are going to start by just confirming, like, I already have all of my model code worked out. What does it look like to get that inside of Garden? So there is a GitHub repo also linked inside the docs. We are going to start with this hello world model, very sophisticated. Here as publishers, we are using Modal. We'll talk more about what's happening behind the scenes there in a little bit, but basically we can define what kind of base image we're running on, dependencies and libraries we're using. We make a modal app. And the key thing here is we wrap in a function the code that we want to execute remotely. This is importing NumPy, not doing anything with it, and saying hello. And inside of here, I will just fill out some basic metadata. This is a hello garden. This is a garden of greetings. And then you can have multiple functions inside the same file here. This just has one that we're going to publish and make available to people. This is a hello sayer. Awesome. Yep, this is indeed the thing that I intended to upload. Great. This is not going to be visible to people by default because I'm just playing around. And I made it. Ta-ta. And so now Garden is taking this Python code, doing some stuff, and now Garden knows about it, and people can ask Garden to run this on their behalf. So I also have linked here, you can do this locally with your own install, but just for simplicity's sake, I have a Colab notebook with Garden AI installed. I am grabbing a client. Here is my newly published garden that I just created. It has a DOI here, which is in a draft state by default. You have to, we kind of make you confirm that like, yes, this looks good before we actually make it official with doi.org. But we're using this as an identifier. I'm going to take the DOI of my garden, plug it in here. Cool, I got it. And I know that this garden has this say hello. I don't want the AI to tell me. I wanted to actually see it on the Python attributes to be sure. Beep boop. Okay, great. So that executed in a remote environment outside of Colab gave me the response back that I was expecting. Okay, now we're going to keep adding little steps on top of this. So I gave you a kind of a pre-baked model there that you could just upload to Garden. Now I want to give you a very simple idea of what it is like to iterate on something. We have found that like something that we consistently underestimated, but then really made our driving focus on this project is the iterative debugging and iteration experience, like how you can like fiddle with your environment to get something working is like the biggest, breakpoint for a lot of people. And Modal makes this really, really nice. So I'm going to now show how I use Modal on my machine to troubleshoot and make sure my model is working before I give it off to Garden. So out of band, I have followed the directions inside of this Google Doc. I've installed Modal. I have it on my machine, and I ran Modal setup. I have things working. Gonna bump up my shell resolution a lot. And I have cloned the repository. And I am using needs-a-tweak.py. This might be ready to go already for all I know. I'm going to use Python M modal. I have a global modal, but I've made a virtual env. This makes sure I'm using the version inside of my virtual env. Python M modal run. Whoops, don't want torch yet. Needs-a-tweak.py. So I'm just going to run this blindly and then walk through what's happening in here. Oh, okay. This fails pretty easily because there's something unsyntactical happening. The biggest addition versus the last one we looked at is this thing at the bottom here called app.localEntryPoint. And so when I run something with the modal run command, what this does is it goes and tries to make the image I specified and deploy this function that I made. And app.localEntryPoint is my lets me make a test function that exercises it. So here I'm using app.localEntryPoint. I have my function say something, and I'm saying run it remotely. By saying modal run, it goes and publishes the function remotely. Now I'm going to try to invoke it and make sure it works. It didn't work. I need a message. Hello from USIP uploadathon. Let me try this again. Beep boop, it's doing things. Wow, it said hello from USIP uploadathon. I am so thrilled. This is the cutting edge science that my community needs. And so I can keep this little test function in here. And in fact, it's useful for other people to see how did you invoke it? What was the inputs you gave it? And I won't show going through the Garden form again, but it would be a similar deal. Garden would extract this, publish it. I can make a Garden so that people can run this remotely. And so at a really high level, this is the kind of fundamental flow of publishing something with Garden. Get your model somewhere public, write some code that can stage the model and execute it, and iterate on code that just does a forward pass on your model with modal run myfile.py until you have it working. Once you have it working, you can hand off that file to Garden, and we will let people run that function on Garden's behalf. And so this is just the fundamental flow we walk through. Use modal to debug, hand off to Garden. Next, we're going to go into how do I actually get a model in play. But first, I want to pause and just take a moment, if anything, if people are particularly confused on anything before we proceed. I'm going to make the pause nice and awkward so people feel really at ease to speak up. Okay, we're moving on. Everyone understands everything perfectly. Oh, Miles, that's awesome. Great. Thank you for saying so. All right. So now we want to do something that's somewhat, well, this is still going to be trivial, but make this a little more realistic. How do we actually get our model in? So the big idea here is that we are going to want to bake in our model weights into the image that Modal is building so that the cost of downloading and staging the model is just done one time. And then every additional time someone is invoking your function, the model weights are there. There's no lengthy download that happens. And Modal has done some containerization black magic that makes their cold starts on even really surprisingly massive containers, like really fast. So this baking in process works decently well. For this to work, you do need your model weights to be published somewhere publicly accessible. They can't just be like on your machine and somehow you like take them from your machine and get them into Garden in one fell swoop. This is feature, not a bug, in that in order for someone to be able to, if they want to get your code outside of Garden, run it in some other context, making sure your weights are somewhere that people can reliably go find it is pretty important. And so we'll show you some examples of how to do that. If you are using Hugging Face or GitHub to store model weights, git modelstaging.py in the uploadathon repo. This shows you essentially these are Git repos. You can do this run commands guy on the end of your image and say git clone my repo, and that will go and grab the files. Also, if you have things in more of a file bucket situation, a lot of people use Figshare. If you don't already do stuff with Hugging Face and you just need somewhere quick and dirty to get a model today, using Figshare is nice. You can just drag and drop something in there. And here is what it would look like to go grab weights from somewhere in Figshare. And so now let's say, oh, looking at the chat. Okay. Leyland, thank you for saying. Owen, we'll talk to you. So I have this model file inside of my image, inside of the thing that is wrapped with app.function. I just need to pull the model from disk into memory and execute it. Here I am using the classic scikit-learn iris feature prediction, but we don't need to go into what's happening here. Really, I just wanted to point out, get your model weights in on the image, and then you can just load it into memory inside the body of your function. Also note that you need to do your imports inside of the function. Also, to the extent possible, it is nice to have like as primitive data types as possible as your input and output. Like if you have a pandas data frame in, maybe there could be mismatches in the pandas version of someone calling your function and the version in your function. But to the extent that you have things that are more just like strings or files, that is going to have less possibility for things to go wrong. So here I'm just taking like a raw array and sending a raw array back, but doing some pandas stuff inside of the function body. And then one more thing, let's say you are doing something that could use GPU acceleration. To ask for a GPU inside of your function decorator, just say GPU equals the kind of GPU that you want. Garden gives everyone basically like $5 of free compute a month via modal. And this goes a surprisingly long way, unless you are like have a very long running function that is on the most powerful GPU. This should last you a decent amount. And then once you have this environment with the GPU attached, just kind of normal CUDA programming and troubleshooting from there that we all know and get stymied by a lot. So now bringing it all together, I'm going to go back to the retrogressive thaw slump model that Ben showed originally, or that I showed from Ben originally. Oh, whoops, we were already looking at this. So now we kind of saw the full picture. How did we get from, let me actually go. This is what the text of what Ben wrote looked like in his modal file to get this working and get it to the state that someone could just go invoke it on demand via Garden. Has all of his requirements pinned. We love that. Has his serialized model in a public place. We love that. And a function that just takes an image URL and sends the data back. And here is an example that someone could use of like, oh, here's valid input that I could use to test out this model myself. Extremely useful. Now, let's say, cool, Garden seems interesting. I'm afraid of being locked into this platform that these people have apparently just released the first version of, or $5 a month is not enough for my ML workloads. These are very reasonable things to say. We can't give you, tons and tons of free GPU time to do massive production scale runs. But what we're trying to go for in Garden is how do we really lower the barrier to just trying out someone's model? Oh, I saw that someone published a model on this topic. That seems interesting. Can I play with it? Does it work on data that is valid for my domain, my research? So Garden, we want to make sure that we give you enough horsepower to go shopping, but then also make it possible to either bring your own modal or bring your own compute and sort of step outside of Garden if you have found a model that really works for you and you're ready to do a big production run. So what might that look like? If you are bringing your own modal, here we have the whole file that Ben wrote to get the retrogressive thaw slump model working. You could just grab it, paste it into a Python file locally, and do modal run, do a bunch of other things you can see in the modal docs to do much bigger batches. But again, in order to get things running on Garden, it must have been the case that Ben specified his requirements, specified the right base image, and you're off to the races with this. Or if you want to be outside of modal, again, compared to, like a GitHub README that might be a little incomplete, this is guaranteed to have everything needed and specified to get something running. So this can be a really nice starting point to say, try and reconfigure something for run on an HPC cluster you have an allocation on. And by the way, the sort of like research computing, cloud computing connection is something that our group is really, really, really interested in. We're working on things to bridge this more automatically. But in the meantime, we are hopefully giving people raw materials to just make these jumps a little easier. And that is all of my prepared content. By design, we have a good chunk of time until the end of the session for people to play around, for us to go into breakout rooms and troubleshoot and help you out, get things running. I'll pause there for kind of like high level questions before we go into sort of like troubleshooting mode.
So one thing I wanted to throw in, this such a great introduction to this concept. So thank you, Will. There's gardens, which are collections of these functions, and there's been interesting discussion in other fields about like what is the meaning of a garden. And so we do a lot of work with material science, and there's a bunch of people that are interested in batteries, like how to design batteries. And so in order to design think about batteries, there's like resilience to temperature conditions. There's, I don't know, Ben Blazik could probably help me with this, but there's a bunch of different characteristics about batteries that people have written models for. And so there is a garden for, so you're interested in batteries, and this gives you access to all the functions, maybe written by people from different institutions that can all play together to help you like really analyze different materials for batteries. Or another use case is everybody working on their PhD has done a model that models some condition. Wouldn't it be interesting to have a garden that collects the best of, and so now you can see them across like different implementations and decide which one works best for your use case. And I believe it's correct that anybody can, how would you do this? Maybe it's not supported yet, that anybody could collect a garden of awesome, ice tracking functions. and regardless of who wrote them, and put them all together and then share that as something. So yeah, and so we didn't also go too much into like the searching capabilities, but eventually we're going to have a lot of gardens sitting in here, and then it'll be very interesting that you could search. This should be the first place you come to, like, okay, I'm going to be doing research on movement of ice. Maybe someone's already written a model, and I can start from that. And so you can go to the garden page and start searching from there. So I think also before we get into the hacking portion, oh, Miles has a good question. Confused how garden and modal interacting inside hello world.py or needs a tweak. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Will.
Thank you. Let's go take a look at one of them. And thanks for kind of like zooming in on this, because it will help to be much more specific about what's going on here. So you're asking, how are garden and modal interacting inside of hello world.py? And just looking at this file alone, garden is not at all in the picture yet, right? Like this is pretty much just doing modal stuff. And the only time that garden comes in the picture is, cool, I got this function working inside of the modal context. Now I can hand it off to garden. And previously I've made this, maybe I could like share the text of it around or whatever. But like someone can't just come and like execute your function. Basically what garden is doing is taking your modal function and making it more easily, instantly runnable by other people. That's my quick answer to that. But Miles, would love to like dig in a little deeper if you could kind of like say, I don't follow this part in particular, or like what's happening here.
Yeah, sure. It's really, I've got this function in Garden where I can see this little snapshot, the from Garden AI import Garden client, and then it has this basically the same exact function as say hello. How do I now in a hello world.py like we have here run that from Garden instead of as a modal function?
Got it. Yeah. And so now that we're like thinking like I'm someone consuming the model and not someone publishing it, now if you're someone running the model, you don't need to be thinking about modal. The steps here are, here's the hello garden that I created. This is the identifier of the garden. And what I do is I have garden installed somewhere. I've fetched a garden client. I got my garden that happens to have just this one say hello function. And all of the functions that were in my modal file are methods on this garden now. And I can call it here. And so this is how someone not using modal, just looking at garden, they've gone, let's say you linked someone, or they searched, or they saw a citation. Oh, I do want to play with Atom GPT. Okay, interesting. Here's the garden of Atom GPT examples. And here is the sort of boilerplate code of how you go invoke this from a garden. So this is like, did I make any headway conceptually, or is this as dense as it was a second ago? Okay, sweet. Thanks.
Much better. Thank you.
For sure. Any other high level questions? If you're curious about it, other people are too, I'm sure.
I have another question if no one else wants to jump ahead.
Please.
Well, I make my garden and it seems like a static function. It's not tied to any kind of actual version control, right?
Yeah.
So if I wanted to play around in my modal Git repo to where I get things how I want them, my garden's not going to update automatically. Or is there a way to do that?
Yeah. So this is like a really, really on the nose thing to point out. We have like kind of just got this version of things out the door, and we have a lot of like sort of metadata related features to improve on right after this. Right now, so there's no kind of automated linking. The way to go like get things updated would be you can currently basically re-upload your file, and that will kind of overwrite things. And furthermore, basically like the workaround hacky flow right now is keep things kind of like as a test until you're really satisfied with it. And once you're ready to like lock it in and really share with the world, then kind of mint your DOI on it. But currently, we don't have versioning, and effectively, you uploaded the thing once and that's what you got. That's not good. We need to improve that and like actually add versioning support.
Although I'm going to go
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
Will's feature, not a bug.
Yeah.
So first off, you definitely want to be doing your gross testing of like how do I even get this to run using modal run. So then you're not interfacing with the garden infrastructure, and then I would say once you publish it and you get a DOI, you don't want the function changing. The model can't change once there's a DOI because that's like people are now relying on it. So ideally, there'd be a way that we have metadata that says this DOI is derived from that one, but certainly it makes sense that you can't change the model once it's been issued a DOI. And you stick that in your paper, and then people can rely on it and update it, and then it's a new DOI.
Yeah, I get that. Thank you.
Jail.
Yeah, great question. If you have a very complex structure or package conflicts, how do we handle it? Can we do Docker builds or similar solutions? So a couple thoughts there. There's like basically, yes, there are a couple ways to like to go about this. You can, as we've seen in these examples so far, just like state explicitly, I need these packages. And even for like, I don't know, depending on how complex is very complex, maybe that doesn't work for you. There's one group we work with. We have partners at the University of Wisconsin in a materials lab, and they have this like mega framework that like is finicky and takes a long time to install. And I have just encapsulated that into a container that I use in a couple different places. And I'm going to just like show you how I use that in Garden right now, if I can find it offhand. Da, da, da. But yes, basically looking, yeah, like there's a whole ton of things you can do that Ben linked to, and I'm just going to show you one concrete example. Oh, maybe I'm not going to find it. Sorry about that. But basically, you can say, you can like build your own image, push it to Docker, and just reference that Docker image as the starting point inside of your modal image, and then do additional things from it from there. So you can like do all of the build sort of out of band. There's like, they have just lots and lots of options for dealing with this. And if modal supports it, Garden supports it.
And so it's interesting. So I started, preparing for this workshop, doing a lot of work with the modal images. And then you talked about how you can't reference a model sitting on your hard drive to go into your image. Is that because there are in the modal image class ways to copy files off your hard drive and put them into the image? Is that because the image is built up in the cloud and not when I upload it to Garden?
Yeah, it's like the fundamental like trick happening here is it's like you are just handing your file to Garden, and like Garden can't see anything happening in your modal account, you know? So it's like even if you use the thing that copied from your local drive and got it working for yourself, well, it's like Garden on the Garden server is now trying to reproduce that, and it can't because the Garden server
Right.
isn't on your computer. So like that's like the brute force reason why that won't work. And then also we would like it that your model is somewhere publicly accessible to.
Mhm. So yeah, if you needed to like need a library, like instead of you don't want to make some 20-page function call as your modal function, you could put a a Python package into GitHub, clone that as part of your last step, and then put that into your Python class. So I would, from just, a couple of things I've played with, I'd be surprised if there's anything that you couldn't model this way, that you couldn't get in there. And then the good news is, once you figure it out, nobody else ever has to do it again.
Yeah. And to what Ben was saying there of like, and kind of to your question, Jail, of like the model being complex in structure. One kind of common thing that will snag people is like, okay, but I have I have a torch model and it has like a lot of subclasses that like define the architecture of my model. And something that I see people do is just like, here's Atom GPT. It is a torch model that they've just gone and published as a PyPI package. And then this modal file can just install that PyPI package that has the model architecture definition. And then we then go just like grab the weights inside the image build step. So like using PyPI or grabbing a whole Hugging Face repo is one way to like conveniently deal with a more complex model structure.
So is anybody here ambitious enough that they were hoping to upload an actual model that they had, or is this really more like, okay, let me just see how this works? What were people's perceptions coming here?
I actually have another question for y'all. So first off, congrats on building this. It's really impressive. And I think I'm more of a model user. I can see myself as someone who's shopping for models. I kind of like that comparison, Will, that you made. So I guess my question is about like adding more model metadata, right? Because like if I'm looking for something and I'm interested in using it, I might want to know like what was this trained on? Like what do my inputs have to look like to use this? And like what do I get out? And I was looking like, so some of these have associated materials where I can go read a paper on what their method was, but a lot of them don't. And then this at a glance field, like some of them are really robust and others are not. So I guess I'm kind of wondering like what your plans are for maybe um taking that shopping metaphor further and like adding more metadata for users.
And great. You're a librarian too. Are you working in like the library field, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, great question, and relevant. So basically, we are really keen on that, and we have been very recently in this phase of development of can we just crack the like publishing flow? But with that cracked, then the next big thing to really nail is how do we make it really easy and give good incentives for people to have great metadata. And that includes what input and output looks like. That includes the data set it's trained on. we have in our group these projects, Foundry and Materials Data Facility, where we are like working on some integrations that will make it easy to like upload a multi-terabyte data set, and reference that in the garden that was trained on that data set, for example. So it's basically like, this is critical. This is actually like really central to the garden grant too, is like all of this like robust and deep metadata linkage. And basically it's like up next. Yeah.
And
This is also a huge, we would love your feedback on this. If you have any ideas of like what sort of metadata you would be interested in, this is exactly the kind of thing we'd love to get out of this.
Okay. Yeah, I totally get that. I can imagine this was like so much work to like stand this up. Um, and then yeah, I'm curious to see how it grows in the future. So
and also, I think this is also a bit of how, comparing Hugging Face to Garden. So Garden comes out of the research environment, and so this sort of metadata is our bread and butter. There's probably some garden metaphor. That's the best part about this project, is it has so many great metaphors. But yeah, this sort of research-oriented metadata is critical to us, less so for like a general industrial model. One other question I had coming from this is there anything that we could do, or how would you think about so you're a consumer of models. Is there anything you would do to try to induce a model author to publish it through Garden to make your life easier? It's like, oh, here's this great model. How would I induce the authors to put them here, since you have access to them?
is that a question for me?
It is,
Are you-
yes.
Okay.
It was starting to sound like a rhetorical question, but no, I'm going to go for a real question.
Well, I guess my first thought is that I see a lot of opportunity for like crediting for researchers, right? Like the minting a DOI, I think is really critical, and like the opportunity to link data beyond the publication and I think is pretty exciting. I think academic researchers are interested, right, in citations and seeing how their work gets used. I think a DOI is like a critical part of that. But I also maybe see an opportunity for like licensing. I don't know if you've thought about like adding um like a license for these models to like restrict commercial access or like keep them open, like considerations of like things like that I think might be interesting for researchers. I know like at Stanford we host data sets on something called Rediviz. And we get a lot of folks from industry that want to use these data. So it's really important for us to be able to control access that way. I don't know, I can see like trained models maybe having like similar concerns. Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, we think in our kind of like brainstorm, we think a lot about that, like the crediting as like a really big incentive to think about and to like use to motivate people to get great metadata up. The licensing part is something that at least I wasn't thinking about, and that's useful. And I'm gonna like chew on that.
Sure. Yeah. Good luck. It's a little bit of a rabbit hole once you but yeah, I think useful to think about.
And do you think, is it Stanford, is the Redwood data repository? Is that the one
Um,
that you're thinking of, or what was the name you?
we have a couple there. We just started a partnership with an organization called Rediviz. Um, but we also, we have our Stanford data repository, which is like another big data store for lots of things, publications, data, videos, like all kinds of media. Yeah.
Okay, well, look at that for ideas. See how stealing intellectual property around licensing, always interesting.
Well, and I I see in the chat, thank you for responding to Ben's question on kind of like wanting to play with models versus just sort of like learning what we're doing here. And so it looks like there may be no one who is excited and has a model they're excited to get out into the world, which is fine.
I would love feedback on this format because we just sort of made this up over
Yeah.
the summer. Like, could you imagine that it's realistic that people would bring models? Are there suggestions for like what this sort of a session should look like? Oh, I do like that. Tracking citations and downloads.
Yeah, for sure. We really want to get that running.
But yeah, feedback on this session format.
Hello again. To say thank you for that demo. Yes, I kind of wish I had read the session description more closely when I signed up, because I didn't realize that what the session entailed. I just saw Model Garden and thought that sounds interesting. I'm very interested in those, and signed up. But yeah, I really like the thing, and yes, if I had known, I would have been keen. Even what might be kind of interesting. The only thing I'd suggest is it might have been interesting if there was a way to like create like a toy model to upload, in a sense, so that if you didn't have a model that you could upload, you could still go through the process. That might have been interesting.
Yeah, that is very good feedback, and also something we talked about and I kind of let slip. But I will next session. That is a really good idea.
Because yeah, I'm quite keen to have a go at all the different tools that you talked about and in slower time. So thank you for the demo.
What? First off, excellent Doctor Who print behind your head.
I forgot that was there. Yes.
But second question, like, how do we handle support? So, like, okay, fine. You're like, okay, I'm motivated. You go home tomorrow morning at 2 a.m. our time. You decide to give it a try, and then you're like, oh, I should have asked about this. What is our support model? Will.
The so far it has been email, Will, or Owen. More robustly than that, people can join our open Slack. Also, while we're in that, and I'm in the ESIP Slack, you could like anyone here who is having a go at it later and runs into something, please do just like DM me on there, and then we could like get started that way. That would be fantastic.
We'll start a channel.
Yeah, that would be great too. Yeah.
So I noticed you've got a variety of models on there already. So what was the original? Was there an original area that you were developing this sort of idea for?
I think, and you know, other people on the team can correct me here, but it's like the idea has been, okay, there's lots of interesting subdomains that we'd like to support. It so happens that we have a lot of materials people like directly on our team and in our orbit. So that's been like a useful sort of like test case. Like, can we really accommodate that niche? But the idea is hopefully that basically in a lot of interesting scientific subdomains, there are a lot of cool models that are not fine-tuned llamas. If you have a fine-tuned llama, there's better platforms than us. But if you have something that is like, you know, it's kind of like doesn't quite fit that mold, how can we be the place for your little community? Yeah.
But this isn't NSF grant, and I think most of the PIs are. There's a lot of material science in the PIs on the grant.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
material science, chemistry, we have some physics in there. But yeah, it's mainly just because our expertise is in that area, and so trying to get a little bit of a cohesive network there. But I think the tools we're building are, you know, generalizable.
So it sounds like you envisage a sort of like community element to the garden. So it's not just it's about more than the model in a sense.
Yes, I'll actually throw it to other people on the team, but like that is again like similar to like I was super happy that if I don't get your name wrong, Maricela was like brought up, oh, what about richer metadata? And now you bring what about community? These are like, yeah, we're quite keen on it. And figuring out both how to accommodate that like just in the platform, but also like this talking to people, making the connections. Like how can we work with earth scientists to make a really useful resource together? Super interested in that.
Super. I think there'll be a lot of scope because I think that a lot certainly in weather and climate, people are just at the starting point really with kind of having a community where people might reuse machine learning models. I think up to this point, a lot of people have been more in the kind of machine learning. You train your model and then you do something with it, and often you don't get much further than that. But now we get to the point, well, yeah, especially as models get larger, where it's going to become much more normal to like use someone else's model. So this looks like a really good workflow for that.
Wow. Thank you for describing our, yeah, that's like exactly kind of the goal is like we think in these domains, like there's a paper where like I trained the model, I did some tasks, look at this benchmark, but it's like, where did it go? And we want to be the place for it to go.
Exactly, and so I mean, yeah. So this is what I'm thinking of is in my team is how what does this workflow look like in our organization? Because when people think the project workflow has always been around like getting data and training, but I imagine like I don't know how many years time, 5 years time, the papers will be mostly about I got this model from somewhere and I did an experiment with it rather than I got some data and trained a model and look, here's a graph which shows it learned something. And there's not much definition on what like an inference focused research project looks like, really, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking, I guess one thing we could do is be looking at new papers that have models and then reach out to the author and say, have you thought about publishing your model? And of course, the answer probably is yes, but now I can't run it anymore myself.
Yes, yes. Yes, because there's like big high profile models, like for example in weather and climate, something like GraphCast or something, they've got gazillions of people and dollars and so on. But there's all the like smaller models that people are doing interesting things, and it's a huge overhead to try and publish the model through a lot of ways.
But this, as long as you still remember how to run the model, I think we've shown that it's not a big deal to publish it through
It's
Garden
not TCM. Yeah.
if you can still run it.
Yes. Yes. Well, hopefully people have thought about that.
Ooh, land cover classification models. I'm going to throw that in the doc. Thank you, Julian.
And Julian, is it kind of a similar thing that there are a lot of grad students training models that could be useful, but it's just a matter of convincing them to publish it, make this part of their, the workflow for making it for the paper.
Yeah, I would think that, those are kind of general models that people keep reinventing in some ways. There's a lot about the scales, about those different aspects, but there are some, common remote sensing sensors like Sentinel and so forth that are reused across many, many different studies, where I guess more than the model is also all those labeled data sets that have been used to train the models, and people often don't share those. They might share the model actually, but they might not share the labeled data sets that they have created. So, but I would think from what I've seen, there are a lot of people report matrices of accuracy and type 1 and 2 errors and so forth, but sharing the model and sharing the label data sets is still something that is not very frequently done, I would say. So there is definitely
Yeah.
a need there.
Is there like an obvious data repository for those labeled data sets?
I mean, there is something called Radiant Earth that they're trying to do some kind of supporting some kind of repository around those specific label remote sensing data sets. But otherwise, I think they will be spread out across different data repositories. Yeah.
So the Garden Project, this group came out of a group that started with a materials science data repository, materials data facility. And so it's interesting, there's like a thread of data repository, labeled data sets, and then models. So it's a little bit of a ecosystem that we need to try to create in other places.
Thanks for dropping that eSIL link. Checking that out.
Yeah, sure. I know they have a summit coming up. I think it's in May. I know they kind of teach their Cyverse platform, which is like cloud computing, big data for environmental scientists, but I wonder if there's like some opportunity for like a synergy between something like gardens and that. Yeah. I'm also wondering if you've thought about like shopping this around to students or like undergrads in maybe like a computer science program or like undergrads in universities or grad students even like yeah, like getting this in curriculum and like kind of changing the culture from I think like in the libraries we focus a lot on trying to get students because sometimes it's hard to change faculty's kind of modes of operating. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like well, Ben said it. Yeah, it's like we are thinking about how this could be incorporated into curricula. That's interesting. And I don't have deep thoughts on that right now. Our like first kind of like baby step is we are like starting to take on undergrad interns, where it's like fun experience for them to be like, hey, we know that there are interesting reusable stuff in this scientific subdomain you're interested in. And can you start getting a model seeded for that community? And that's like been a nice tractable thing for undergrads. Um, as for something more sort of like systemic, so to speak, as you're saying, of like how do you sort of change people's minds and habits around model sharing. Step one, we got to just make this like platform super duper robust and get people publishing. But we would love that. I don't have, or Ben, who is more of the mastermind here, might have more sort of concrete plans on how to accomplish that.
I don't think we have specific plans on that right now, but yeah, I think it's a good idea and something we could talk to some of our other PIs about.
And I was trying to find the link for this Cyber 2A workshop. And so this was early career professors and also like postdocs training in machine learning techniques. And so we got in there. It was actually about 3 months too early for this release of Garden that's much more useful, but we're going to be adding it to a chapter. But I imagine there are a number of like these kind of workshops for people who are like trying to understand how to use machine learning better and not necessarily classes, although I guess by now it is part of just the earth science curriculum is machine learning, but it could be workshops or carpentries or things like that that we could look for.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the carpentries. I feel like that would be a good way to go. Um, yeah, I don't know. I guess sometimes I work with faculty to kind of help them curate their data, but if I come across maybe someone who's interested in more open model sharing, I I wouldn't mind like directing them to gardens and maybe giving them your contact infos. I'm not sure how much I would be able to help them, but but yeah.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. Well, it's if that is if anyone is see what else is in the chat. If anyone wants to hang out and like you know, play with things, super happy to like do any sort of like go a little deeper on how might I get a toy model running in these last 15 minutes, but I think this might be the session. Thank you for the link, Julian.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining, and email us if you have any questions. We have an open Slack, like Will mentioned. We can add that to the document. And then yeah, just reach out to us by email or find us elsewhere.